Hello, everybody. I'm Jody Schneider. I'm president of the FCC and an editor at Bloomberg here in Hong Kong. And I wanted to before I introduce our speaker today, to tell you to look at your email because there's going to be announcements of several lunches and movie screenings coming up in October. So check your email soon. And we'll have a lot going on. But I wanted to, without further ado, introduce our speaker because we want to have plenty of time for him to speak and also for us to ask questions. He will be speaking on digital terror and hate, implications for Asia and beyond. And our speaker is Rabbi Abraham Cooper, the Associate Dean of the Simon Wiesenthal Center. And as a little bit of background, which most of you, I'm sure, know, around the world, the incidence of hate crimes has been growing in recent years. A study by the Wiesenthal Center's Digital Terrorism and Hate Project has shown a number of alarming developments in hate crime, including that social media is increasingly a weapon of choice for hate groups, and that online forums are increasingly being used to spread hate and incite violence among others, Muslims, blacks, Jews, and other racial and ethnic minorities, not only in the US, but New Zealand, Myanmar, Nigeria, and China. Rabbi Cooper is going to discuss the growing incidence of hate crime around the world and how digital technologies are being used to spread such crime and what we can do about it. He is the Associate Dean of the Simon Wiesenthal Center, which is a leading Jewish human rights organization. For 3 decades, he has overseen the Wiesenthal Center's international social action agenda and worldwide promotion of tolerance education. His work in Asia has helped counter negative stereotypes about Jews and open new avenues in dialogue and intergroup relations in Japan, South Korea, China, India, and Indonesia. I give you Rabbi Cooper.
Thank you, Jody. Before I start my comments and presentation with my colleague, Dr. Gover, I am, after all, a member of the clergy, a rabbi, and the basic rule of thumb is if you don't want to lose your ordination, you have to try to tell a joke. And we'll be talking about something very serious. So let me tell you, actually, this was a true story. I have a friend, Malcolm Hoenlein, who is the head of the President's Conference of Major Jewish Organizations in the United States, based in New York. And as such, he's gotten to know over the years many non-Jewish politicians. Well, one Irishman came to him and he said, you know, Malcolm, all I ever hear about you is Shabbos, the Sabbath, going to shul, the synagogue. And, you know, we know each other 25 years. This coming Saturday morning, you tell me where, I want to join you for services. So what time should I come? He said, well, the repast, or as we say in Hebrew, the kiddush, that's at about 11:15. So I suggest come around 10:30, 10:45, and then we can have a good whiskey afterwards. He said, no. I'm going to come when you show up. You'll show me everything that goes on. He said, okay. You know, it's rather lengthy, 9 a.m. He came. He was given a prayer book, a tallit, a prayer shawl, and Malcolm went point by point throughout the service explaining to this wonderful gentleman everything about the service, what they were up to, and then it came time to read from the Torah scroll, the Holy Ark, opened it up, carried the Torah, they opened it up, the ancient Hebrew text, the 5 books of Moses, explained all of that, and then they put the Torah scroll back in the ark, and at that point, the rabbi of the synagogue came up to the podium, took off his watch, went like this, and put it down. So the gentleman was waiting for an explanation from Malcolm. Didn't hear any. He said, Malcolm, what's the meaning of the rabbi taking off his watch, holding it up, and putting it down? He said, it means absolutely nothing. And he went on for a rather long sermon. I'm not here today to deliver a sermon. I'm really so honored by the invitation to be with you all. And I'm a frequent visitor to Hong Kong. I'm old enough to remember when there was a different worship parked and a different military contingent here in Hong Kong. As a religious Jew, I've never felt more comfortable in any city outside of Israel. Diverse Jewish community, kosher food, and believe me, in the 1980s and 90s, before things developed in China and elsewhere, I actually used to come to Hong Kong for Shabbat and then go out and do my business. So I feel very close to Hong Kong, and I've also witnessed on occasion the dramatic, sometimes slow, but inexorable changes that have taken place here. In the past few weeks, I've been in Santiago, Chile, at the United Nations, in the Bundestag in Berlin, and here I am in Hong Kong. I also had a meeting with the top police brass in New York City. I'm sure you follow what's going on in the States, but certainly from the point of view of the Jewish community, we're extremely concerned because in the city that is home to the largest Jewish population in the world, religious Jews have been beaten in the streets of New York on a number of occasions. And it's deeply troubling. It's the main issue that New York Jews are talking about, and we're collectively holding our breath because the Jewish New Year begins Sunday night, and we're all concerned about what's going to happen. So I asked the top brass of the NYPD, what has changed in the last 5 years? And these are burly detectives, tough guys, not exactly technological experts, but they said simultaneously, social media. What's changed is social media. In Santiago, Chile, I was with the Ministry of Foreign Affairs and also the Ministry of Education. It's quite a beautiful country. They've had their own Soros, it's a Scottish term, for troubles decades back, but it's a very vital place today. And yet, the conversation quickly shifted to social media. Why? Because essentially, out of the blue, they have a refugee problem in Chile, as do almost all their neighbors. Despite the distances, many, many people from Venezuela, out of desperation, reached the borders of Chile, came into the country, and people who were on the margins, barely, politically in that country, used social media in order to stoke the fears of the population. There are too many of them, they're taking our jobs, who asked them to come, who's going to pay for the social needs. And so almost overnight, social media supercharged the concerns of many citizens. Some of those concerns are legitimate, but gave an opportunity to demagogues on the fringes of the social and political discourse in that country and put it front and center to almost virtually anyone with an iPhone. And this is something that is manifesting everywhere I go in all our discussions. So I think it would be helpful, maybe in the Q&A, we'll come back to it anyway. But what I'd like to do is to explain how the Wiesenthal Center approaches the issue of social media. Generally speaking, for example, in the NYPD, they said, well, you know, there's nothing we can do because it's hate speech. And in the United States, we have the First Amendment, and therefore, the only thing the NYPD can do is wait for the next incident and maybe use it a little bit to educate people, but there isn't anything we can do. So, friends, here is our approach. And it's been this way now for about a quarter of a century. We look at the manifestations online of hate as two overlapping arenas. One is hate, or what we would call hate speech, And that represents the postings of individuals and groups who are nasty, who are bigots, maybe anti-Semites, but they don't represent an existential threat to society. And then we have the terrorists, who are also haters. But when it comes to the food chain of terrorism online, there should be, I hope, zero tolerance anywhere in the world. And when you see something that's involved in that kind of activity, what we do, of course, is we draw a straight line, not only to law enforcement, but also occasionally to an intelligence agency. But what do we do about hate online? And there, we have a different approach. Because as soon as you get involved in a debate over hate speech, that's a debate, healthy as it is, that will go on for another 100 years. And our perspective is the following. Social media does not represent a debating society. The power of social media is that it represents the most powerful marketing platform ever conceived of. And as such, whoever it is who's doing the marketing, this wonderful group, our Museum of Tolerance, but also the evildoers, there's no fact checker online. There's, for hate crimes in the real world, at least you have a chance if your synagogue or church or mosque has been spray painted. This physical evidence. You bring in the police, there may be cameras, you track down the perpetrator. On the internet, you can do things anonymously. In fact, you can even attack individuals or groups who may not even know that they've been targeted. So we think one of the most important elements of the internet is a little button called I agree. Now, be honest, because I'm a rabbi. I want to know how many of you have ever read that long contract text underneath those two buttons that says I agree, connect me, or I disagree? How many of you have ever read the long Megillah text underneath? I have never read it, but we have good researchers at the Wiesenthal Center who have. Our approach is, when you touch that button and you sign on to a service, that's a contract. So we believe that the most important approach and on this overall issue of hate and terrorism and violence and threats and bullying, the key component here are the companies themselves, meaning that when you push that button, you have an agreement, you have a contract for a service. That means the company has every right, and in our view, obligation, to have transparent rules and to put some young people and some money behind this effort, so when a consumer or AFP or the Wiesenthal Center contacts Twitter or Facebook or YouTube, they're going to get an answer. How come you allow this material to be posted? It's far from perfect, but I can tell you in all of our discussions from Berlin to this august city, if you treat this issue as a hate speech issue, the evildoers and the bad actors will be untouched. In addition, speaking yesterday with a faculty group at Baptist University, we think it's important for, even here in Hong Kong, not to look to the government to take the lead or have the main answer to a problem. And I say this across the board, even though the places I described have unique governments and their own problems, et cetera, et cetera. But why is that? Because the technologies are ever morphing. It's a youth-oriented online culture. And if you think that the UN or UNESCO or the ASEAN group can come up and write some sort of rules or laws, and that'll be the end of the problem. It's complete nonsense. What we need is to make sure that the people who provide these services create the necessary technological tripwires to catch those people who are the professional bigots and racists, and to be responsive to people within the community. If they don't do it, that would be a wonderful time to bring in your local government and talk and introduce that terrible, the only word they actually worry about, the R word, regulation. The companies don't want regulation. From my point of view, we need a consortium approach that includes civil society, first and foremost the companies, and of course, governments will always find their way to be at the table. That is, in sort of short form, a thumbnail sketch of how we need to approach a problem that is just not going away. Although you gave a very good and quick summation, it's worth noting and reviewing the fact that we now have not only to worry about Islamist-based terrorists, but we now have seen that the white supremacists and the neo-Nazis, the lone wolf actors, if you will, domestically, not only in the United States, but especially, have caught up, if you will. And what you have confronting our communities, our religious groups, the police, the intelligence services, how do you find and interdict a lone wolf domestic terrorist if they were flying underneath the radar all the time? So the murderer, Robert Bowers, of 11 Jews at prayer on a Saturday morning in Pittsburgh, he was on social media communicating with other people of similar attitudes. And he actually wrote, you know, enough of this, I'm going to go do the deed. And he kept his social media line open and went ahead and murdered 11 people that Saturday morning. The New Zealand murders, mass murders of over 50 Muslims at prayer on a Friday morning were shocking enough. I want to tell you, it was, of course, on a Friday, that's their holy day. On Monday morning, I received a call from Peter Stern from Facebook, and with some sense of pride, he said, "Rabbi, I just want to make sure that you know that we've managed to take down 1.5 million postings of those murderers that were put up on Facebook." 1.5 million, because this lone wolf, if you may recall, he wore a helmet, he embedded a camera in the helmet, he live streamed the mass murders. And even though there isn't a single TV station in the world that goes out live, the geniuses who give us the bells and whistles of internet technologies do go out live. And so millions upon millions of people watch the butcher murdering, gunning down people, maiming them for life. I met yesterday at the, I guess it's yesterday, maybe it's this morning. Anyway, I don't know. But Secretary General Guterres greeted President Trump, Vice President Pence, and Secretary of State Pompeo for a special session on protecting religious minorities. About 10 weeks ago, Pompeo hosted a 3-day program at the State Department, and it was there where I met, in a wheelchair, the head imam of the church in Christchurch, who came to speak. He was the second speaker. The first was the rabbi from Pittsburgh. The second was an imam in a wheelchair. We don't want these things to be repeated, but I have to report to you right now that we have to act collectively to ensure the following. Just as in the real world, we can't legislate hatred out of existence, we can't eliminate it online either, but we can significantly degrade the marketing capabilities of the hate groups, of the terrorists, and I can't emphasize enough to you how empowering it is for this lone wolf to go online and find people all over the world who think and want to act just like him. That's a terrible empowerment. The tutorials are there. And I would say also that here in Hong Kong, in the 2 days that I've been here and doing something the rabbis don't do very well, listening a lot, you can understand and see how social media has changed the equation here. Maybe not in the headlines, which I don't follow that closely, but speaking to teachers, including people at universities, they are beginning to experience on their campuses and sometimes online very, I would say, nefarious and threatening threatening emails and social media postings that not only make some of the adults in the room feel uncomfortable, they're beginning to shut down the possibility of discussion, of debate, of putting into context the anger and the disappointments of young people, that the vehicle that everyone now chooses to use, social media, itself is not a facilitator for discussion. It's not a facilitator for debate. What it is, it's an opportunity for people who've already made up their mind to feel good about how they feel because they associate with others. It also gives them an opportunity to say things online they don't have the guts to say face to face. And so it's really poisoned the attitudes. Ted, are you here? Let me take a couple of minutes to quickly show you a slide. And anyone who would like to get access to this particular presentation can go up, we can tell you, go up on the cloud and download it. And thanks. I'm still going to ask Ted to do it. Also, I don't have too many of these, but to show you how old I am, I remember we used to give out floppy disks, then it was CDs. By the way, if you have any technological questions about digital terrorism and hate, I can give you the email of my grandchildren in Jerusalem. I don't understand the technology. Maybe I know a little bit about hate. So this is actually the 2019 report that we put out. It's a snapshot of who the players are, how they're utilizing the technologies. And by the way, if you have children or grandchildren at home, or some of you who may be directly involved in gaming online, the bad guys have already arrived there and figured out what an easy place to identify young people and recruit them. So if we want to come back again in the year, we talk about the latest bells and whistles. The problem is technology is neutral, and it's being harnessed not just by great people and wonderful, young, talented folks, but also disruptors, terrorists, and bigots. The other thing that we do is we put out an annual report card. As a person who never got straight A's, I love this. We actually grade Facebook, Twitter, YouTube, VK.com, which is a major Russian site, and some of the other platforms that are actually sympathetic to bigots that are being used, like Vote and others. And we find that's been a useful way to encourage better corporate behavior. Just quickly, we gave Twitter 3 years running an F. I think that's a failing grade here too, right? So we met with Twitter in San Francisco. They had 6 lawyers, and someone said, you know, Rabbi, we noticed that you've been giving us Fs. might you change the grade this year? I said, yes, we're investigating to see if there's a grade lower than an F. Now, they're now getting B pluses and A minus. Why? They didn't find religion, but when the United States Congress held hearings in October 2016, and Homeland Security announced that in one particular month, on average, ISIS alone was sending out 200,000 tweets a day. That changed things, because what started out as a project of a couple of young people in Silicon Valley, everybody's on Twitter today, and it took time for this company to realize that it did have social responsibilities as well. So the presentation for today, and I'm going to try to run through it real quickly, is to show you some slides, some presentations from how the swastika is impacted here in India. Not the historic swastika that preceded Nazism, but the Nazi swastika. And then just at the end, if there is time, to show you a little bit about not just Holocaust revisionism, but other forms of denial of history. So, Ted, where are you? So I think for everyone in this audience, we can go through very quickly. These are from the 1930s, scenes from Nazi Germany. We'll go through that quickly. I think everyone here knows that's the gates of Mauthausen concentration camp. Jews are unwanted. Those are signs that were up all over Germany in the 30s. They were taken down just before the Olympic Games of 1936, and as soon as the games were finished, the signs went back up. And anyone who's a journalist or a student of journalism, if you don't know what der Stürmer is, you should go back and do some research. It is a critically important part of the Nazi dehumanization of Jews of Germany and beyond in the 1930s, the whole invention of Nazi propaganda. Go ahead, Tim. So just quickly to let you know that cover from Der Stürmer was a picture of a medieval woodcut that alleged that Jews were murdering Christian children and using their blood to make matzah. And on the bottom of their cover each week was Jews are our misfortune. And this was the drumbeat in the 30s, and what was absorbed by young people in the 30s, they carried out in the 40s. Go ahead. Okay, continue. Of course, you know about Kristallnacht in 1938, the burning down of all of the synagogues in Germany, the next night in Austria. So one of the points we try to make is, okay, Jewish people especially, we feel very sensitive, obviously, about the swastika and Nazism, about what happened then, 6 million Jews that were murdered. But the other point we try to make, try to explain, is that the Nazi swastika is a live third rail symbol in 2019. Just some of the manifestations and groups, Nazi groups, neo-Nazi groups across Europe. Go ahead. And here's a list, a partial list of neo-Nazi groups on both sides of the Atlantic. Go ahead. And the hate crimes, which, please God, should never come here, but the swastikas, and if you're a member of a synagogue and show up and for services and see that, that's the definition of a hate crime. The damage may be, $25, physical damage. The impact is incalculable. And these are some of the actual music groups on both sides of the Atlantic that also celebrate it. So here we come now to Asia. going to go pretty quickly. I think many of you actually maybe written about it. This is from, these are major music groups. Go ahead. Japan. Kishidan is, I don't know if they still are, but at the time, we're at the top of the music charts in Japan. Okay. Go ahead, Ted. So Ahmad Dani, if you've covered music or culture, I think he does the equivalent of the American Idol in Indonesia and Malaysia. I actually met him when I was in Indonesia many years ago. Unfortunately, he's taken a different tactic now. And go ahead. It's had some impact in Japan. Here is an anti-Korean demonstration in Osaka in 2017. And there you see the SS stormtrooper manga. So if you just freeze it there, this is a famous cafe back in Paris while it was under occupation by the Germans, and they had special places where soldiers who were off duty would come and fraternize. And this is the entrance of a cafe in Indonesia, in which everybody on the staff is dressed to the hilt as Nazi officers. Keep going. Nazi-themed weddings in China. Okay. So if you just stop here for a minute, one of the complaints on the part of the Germans is they've had anti-Nazi laws on the books. They're still there. Many of them are rendered almost useless, actually, because of the internet. But imagine that you have some tourists showing up in full Nazi regalia, as they did, to make the Nazi salute outside the Reichstag. Okay, so every year, the Sacred Heart School in Thailand, they pick a theme. I think it's either the junior or senior girls at this Catholic school. And this particular year, their theme was the Nazis. And they actually have, as you can see, a march through downtown, I think it's Chennai, downtown through the city, beautiful young ladies dressed, wearing the swastikas. Selling beauty using the Nazi death head. Okay, let's just blast through these. I think the point has been made. So very quickly here, the internet is tailor-made for conspiracy theories because there's nobody to attack it. So whether it's the CIA did 9/11 or that the Holocaust never happened, this is actually produced and posted by the Iranians about the Holocaust. And it's worth taking a look at because it does reflect the official ideology of the Iranian government. So this is mocking the 6 million Jews who were murdered. Okay, let's go on. Go further. I want to just end on one particular slide. Keep going, Ted, because we're running out of time. These are all against hoax. Ugly, ugly stuff. So I think this is an appropriate slide to end on, and that is the rape of Nanking and the denial of it by some pretty powerful forces in Japan, various books, etc. And so, again, the idea of being able to put your life forward, dress it up looking as mainstream as possible, and convincing yourself and your followers, and the people who don't have the knowledge or information, inserting that sense of doubt that people were not victimized, that they lied about it for historic or political or nationalistic reasons. So I think we'll stop here. Happy to take any questions or comments that you have.
And there will be microphones available for those who want to ask questions. We're coming around. If you could identify yourself and what your affiliation is. So, any questions? Eric, I'm sure you have a question.
Yeah, thanks, Rabbi. I'm Eric Wisher, Vice President of the club. I mean, these examples from China and Asia, in my experience, I teach part-time at Hong Kong U, and one day I think I was talking about fake news and I got into Holocaust denial, and then I thought, I'll ask the class, what was the Holocaust? One student put his hand up and said it was when the Nazis killed the Jews. I said, how many Jews were killed? 300,000. So, I mean, these examples, I mean, how many of the kids or the married couples dressing up in this insignia, how many of them do you think are actually aware of what they're actually doing? I mean, you know, this is different from the neo-Nazis in Europe or the United States who should know a lot better.
No,
you do know better.
Right.
So how concerned are you that this is being forgotten about?
Right. You're absolutely right, and of course I travel a lot to Asia. One of the reasons people say, what do you like coming to Asia so much? I said, because when I wake up in the morning, I'm not in Europe. But one of the points that it's obvious that most of these young people are doing it because they like the color scheme or the aesthetics. In the world we live in today, it's sort of not as good as an excuse it maybe was 10, 15, 20 years ago. But there is another element here, and that is that for the neo-Nazis in Europe, in the United States, in the Americas, when they see that, they think they have allies and friends. It's also a matter of, in a sense, it of course cheapens history and makes it more difficult to give a context. Maybe there's so many different examples you can give, but take India. If you go on the streets of Mumbai, you still have the Steve Jobs is the #1 bestseller. Your book on fake news, when it comes out, will be right there next to it. And the third bestseller all over the city, it's so jarring, is Mein Kampf. Now, why? This is because someone in India, they say, by the way, this is a book that's a must-read for anyone going to graduate school in business, because Mein Kampf is an example of a highly organized mind. Well, yeah, we're not talking about creating new haters of Jews, etc., but if you're promoting into the mainstream of your culture among elite that kind of messaging, nothing good will come from it. So yes, don't be alarmed. The Wiesenthal Center isn't opening an office to counter neo-Nazi activity in Asia. We got enough problems where we have the real ones. But where today we live, especially with social media, where everything local is global and everything global is local, so when you had the spray painting the other night at the station, you have your friends in LA saying like, what the hell is going on? And, someone calling me up, you're not still thinking of getting on the plane tonight to go? So the impact of this amazing platform continues to grow, and in some ways is actually sort of dictating the way we think, the way we market. And we need to keep in mind that in addition to all of the great things you can do with the platforms, the evildoers overall are ahead of the curve. As soon as you give that access to them, they're already on there. So we can talk about encryption and the problems it poses for police. We could talk about the gaming. If you have kids or grandchildren who are playing the games, do yourselves a favor. Just ask them, have you seen it? And if you have, what have you done about it? And if you do see it, what can you do about it? Send us an email. Send us the link. We have our ways of communicating with the companies. And it's such a vast online world. Not everyone could do everything. You can have maybe even a subcommittee of this organization sort of take a look. You have an expert on fake news, and now you have this amazing delivery platform of fake news, which has obviously changed and challenged every single society on the planet. So I see you as important partners in this. But the one thing I don't see, and I hope that you don't see it that way either, is I'm not here to be the thought police or the censor for ideas. That's not what the Wiesenthal Center is about, and that's not what we want to achieve. I'm not interested in having the ambassador from Cuba to the United Nations coming up and saying, Rabbi, this is great. We could use this, and we'll manipulate it in a way so that our citizens can't use the technology. Well, obviously, we want the opposite to take place. We can't get rid of encryption, because if you do that, then the activists in Iran have no option to communicate. So, like any important issue, the questions are still more powerful than the answers, but awareness is extremely important, and please keep in mind that if you have kids or grandchildren in your sphere, they know a lot more of what's going on in real time than any of us here in this room.
Are there other questions? Okay, yeah, there's one over here.
Thank you so much, Rabbi. My name is Edith Terry. I'm a writer. I was quite interested both in your anecdote about the NYPD and your idea of a consortium approach to addressing digital hatred, let's say. In Hong Kong, I wonder how this would play out in Hong Kong in a society where the basic interlocutors, sorry if this is not coming through, the basic interlocutors reflect different value systems. So in the US, in most European countries, there's a common value system and a rule of law which says if you sit down in this consortium, you have a shared approach to digital hatred. In Hong Kong, there are two media platforms that are playing a very critical role in the protests, and not as purveyors of digital hatred, but as purveyors of information.
Right.
I just wonder how you, you've been here 2 days, but how do you see some sort of your consortium approach working or not working in this context?
Yeah, I'm now old enough, and my knees hurt anyway, to know that you don't parachute in for 48 hours and solve the world's problems. But let me address it in the following way. I'm not sure that it would work in terms of those two platforms. We both know what they are. However, in listening carefully to people here in Hong Kong, in different parts of it, the online bullying, the threats that are made to classmates or teachers, or just heard an absolutely horrific thing, a niece who is incensed because her uncle's on the police force. So, and we're not talking about a 12-year-old. Someone who's made a decision that by virtue of the fact that she has a member of her family who's on the police force, that means bad, evil, want nothing to do with a person like that. So I would say, yes, there are areas that may not be applicable, although if you will send us the links on the things that obviously cross the line, there may be things we can do from LA that can't be done here. We can at least try. But I will say in a more fundamental way that we just can't allow these other trends to go unchallenged. And in order to address it, the companies need to know about it, because I would say I'm not interested in necessarily going to the authorities, but if you see this trend really picking up steam, it will render, I think, helpless many of the universities and high schools where students will come in and say they already have their minds made up about everything, and they're out to dictate sometimes to their elders what they should be thinking, saying, or not saying. I have to tell you, it may or may not be when I heard 2 or 3 of these stories, I said to myself, oh my God, if this technology had been available at the beginning of the Cultural Revolution, what could have possibly happened? This is Hong Kong. China's a different story. But when you hear from teachers, from professors, from others, and from students that this kind of online behavior is beginning to snowball, I think that's an alarm bell that I wouldn't look to the authorities to solve, but to try to come up with strategies that can be applied from within civil society.
Well, please join. Oh, we have another question right here. Okay, one more question.
Rabbi, thank you.
Can you identify yourself, please?
Sorry. I want to go back to your rating system of Twitter, which I have seen and applaud. And my question
Can
is...
you please give your name?
Oh, sorry. My name is Roger Garland. I'm a private lawyer in Hong Kong. The rating system, have you ever considered rating the disgorgements, if only on Twitter, of POTUS number 45? And if not, why not?
What is post 45?
I'm going to explain.
While Twitter as an organization allows Facebook, YouTube, this kind of unrestrained hate speech, the current president of the United States in his Twitter account.
You mean 45, the 45th president of the United States?
Right. And so my question is, have you considered rating his output? And if not, why not?
Well, for one thing, I think our president has a strong enough of an ego that we shouldn't give him his own separate line as a social media outlet, per se. And I'll just make one comment because I'm not in the United States right now, other than to confirm to you that our nation's political and social discourse is broken. And there's plenty of blame to go around. I grew up at a time, Martin Luther King Jr., Bobby Kennedy, the anti-Vietnam, the Soviet Jewry movement that I was involved with. And in all of these arenas, what we took for granted a generation ago of bipartisanship when it came to human rights, that's gone. And didn't happen overnight, and you can't give all the credit to one person. But it is true that all of these tendencies, the negative, are super heated, and before you can even turn around and try to have a discussion about an issue, everything is weaponized. Maybe now one of the most overused words in 2019, but it's true. Even, for example, in the area of anti-Semitism, hearings in Congress, it used to be bipartisan, not anymore. It's left and right, you choose up your side. And if you want to play it from the middle, you're going to be pretty lonely. And as it happens, because of the structure of our institution, we're a nonprofit educational institution. We've never endorsed a candidate. Right now in America, it's very lonely in the middle. But we're going to try to stay the course. And we think at the end of the day, you know, good things will prevail. But I think it's Churchill's comment about democracy being the worst form of government, except for every other form of government, has never been on stronger or fuller display than it is in 2019.
Thank you. Please join me in thanking Rabbi.